The splendors of America's national parks are the distilled essence of a nation. Preserved forever, these majestic parks are a measure of the far-sighted vision that established them. A park is more than pretty scenery, more than a postcard, for there is a story behind each of these national treasures. They represent all that is great, grand, wonderful, and beautiful in our country. But more than that, they are a living link with the past, both near and far. Across the breadth of the United States, we'll explore the stories of 20 parks in 5 regions: the East Coast, the Rocky Mountains, the American Southwest, California, and the Pacific Northwest. Their story is the story of America. During and after the conquering of a continent, poets and philosophers, Emerson, Bryant, Thoreau, saw beauty in the natural world. Artists through the decades have portrayed their wonders. Their cry to preserve this landscape bore fruit with the establishment of the world's first national park, Yellowstone, in 1872. Today, that legacy lives on in the most extensive park system in the world. As the American philosopher Henry David Thoreau stated, "In wilderness is the preservation of the world." Our exploration begins on the densely populated east coast of the United States. Everglades National Park, a subtropical wilderness in Florida. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a densely wooded Appalachian highland astride the border of Tennessee and North Carolina. Shenandoah National Park, a restored wilderness in Virginia. Acadia National Park, preserving a valuable part of the celebrated Maine coastline. Here, sea meets shore. In a dramatic struggle, continually sculpting the Maine shoreline. At Popular Thunder Hole, waves assail the rocks with surging strength. Between high and low tide, marine life has adapted to the daily extremes of water and air. Atlantic sea winds caress this park, warming in winter and cooling in summer. At the water's edge is a lush, evergreen, and deciduous forest, carpeting all but the highest peaks. The geography of this land is a legacy of the Ice Age. About 20,000 years ago, a massive wall of ice between 8,000 and 9,000 feet thick ground away the granite tops of the mountains and plowed out the valleys, leaving behind ponds, lakes, and the East's only fjord. In the waters of Acadia bob the colorful floats of the lobster fishermen. 1,530-foot Mount Cadillac, the highest point on the eastern coastline of the United States, offers a view of much of the park, most of which is located on Mount Desert Island. Most of the park was donated by individuals who were determined to preserve the area. John D. Rockefeller, the noted industrialist and philanthropist, contributed almost a third of the park's 34,000 acres. He also constructed a delightful 57-mile system of carriage roads, now used by hikers, bicyclists, and horseback riders. At Shenandoah National Park, a thin ribbon of highway meanders down the back of the Appalachian Mountains, the Skyline Drive. To the east, the Piedmont. To the west, the Shenandoah Valley. Shenandoah is a story of man's relationship to the land and his impact on it. Native Americans used the land lightly. Their fires may have created the open expanse we call Big Meadow. Here they hunted white-tailed deer, which still roam and enjoy the lush growth of the area. In the 1800s, settlers occupied the area, followed by miners, tree cutters, and hill farmers. Eroded and devastated by generations of use, the land was worn out. Unlike Western parks, which were created out of existing federal lands, this park was purchased by the people and the state of Virginia, then presented to the U.S. government. President Franklin D. Roosevelt dedicated the park in 1936.
And so, my friends, I now take great pleasure in dedicating Shenandoah National Park, of dedicating it to this and to succeeding generations of Americans for the recreation and for the recreation which we find here.
The Civilian Conservation Corps worked to restore the land and build recreational facilities throughout the park. In 1939, Skyline Drive was completed, the same drive that millions enjoy today. It runs 105 miles down the spine of the Blue Ridge. Off each side of the ridge, trails lead into forests, punctuated with the sound of brooks, streams, cascades, and waterfalls. Today, the land has healed. The ancient granite and metamorphic lava, in some areas over 1 billion years old, is covered with a beautiful, recycled wilderness. The perpetually clinging mists and fog give a smoky appearance to this region, the namesake of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The slopes of these low, ancient mountains are covered with more types of trees than all of Europe. Over 3/4 of the park is wilderness, with over 800 miles of trails. The survival of this wilderness land is remarkable. There are two stories here. One, the story of the land, and the other, the story of the people who lived here. Within the park are open fields, pioneer homesteads, and little frame churches, such as at Cades Cove, where the mountain people lived and worshipped. When they died, they were laid to rest in the church graveyards. A persistent people, through determination, they carved out a way of life still followed by hill people in Appalachia. While the Indians had little impact on the land, the newcomers changed it. In the early 19th century, the forest was vanishing. Agriculture, logging, and mining all but ruined the land. Yet, remarkably, over 40% of the original forest in the park is uncut and pristine, much as the Cherokee Indians knew the land. Today, the pioneers are gone, the wagon trains silent, replaced by modern-day travelers in search of a wilderness experience. Each year, they come in increasing numbers, over 10 million of them. Every car must cross the two-lane mountain road between Gatlinburg and Cherokee. This flood of visitors presents a challenge to the National Park Service, for it must balance the need to see and the need of the land to be preserved. The gray, misty mountains of the east have been here, according to geologists, for 500 million years. They are some of the oldest highlands on Earth. They'll remain and survive the onslaught of 20th century man. In contrast to the rugged mountains of the Smokies are the flatlands of Everglades National Park in Florida, the largest subtropical wilderness in America. Water is the lifeblood of the Everglades. A slow-moving river, 50 miles wide and 6 inches deep, flows southward from Lake Okeechobee to the Gulf of Mexico. Covered in a sea of sawgrass, the Native Americans call the area Paheoki, which means river of grass. The climate is relatively warm the year round, with mild, dry winters, rare frosts, and usually wet summers. Moving across this flat land, where the horizon stretches out to meet the sky, one discovers forests, glades, ponds, and hummocks. This complex ecosystem is a paradise for birds. James Audubon, the first of many naturalists, and millions of subsequent bird lovers have thrilled to this ongoing show. This anhinga must dry its wings after flight, for it lacks oils needed to resist waterlogged feathers. A graceful heron carefully stalks a small fish. Walking the popular Anhinga Trail is an invitation to discover an abundance of wildlife. A very important part of this complex ecosystem, the alligator almost lost its battle with hunters. But protected since the 1960s, the alligator populations have recovered dramatically. The preservation of wildlife is a continuing challenge facing the Everglades. Another concern is the dredging and diversion of the fresh water sources of the Everglades. The Everglades ecosystem is dependent on water, a resource that is shared with an urban population of over 3 million and a large agriculture industry. In the Everglades, life hangs in the balance. But for now, as they have for eons. Flocks of birds cross the evening sky in waves. Scattered across the backbone of the continent are a series of high western parks. Rocky Mountain National Park, preserving some of Colorado's high country. Grand Teton National Park, where jagged peaks spear the Wyoming sky. Also in Wyoming, Yellowstone National Park, America's first national park. Montana's Glacier National Park, called the crown of the continent. Where the Rocky Mountains touch the Canadian border, the land is rugged, high, and spectacular. Two parks bridge two nations, Waterton Lakes National Park in Canada and Glacier National Park in the United States. Combined as the Waterton Glacier International Peace Park, it symbolizes the bond between the two nations. Like many parks in the West, the move to create Glacier National Park was encouraged by the railroads. They promoted travel to the parks. The Great Northern Railroad built the well-known Many Glacier Lodge in 1917. It was one of a series of lodges and facilities constructed in the park. But it was a road, not the railroad, that opened Glacier to millions of people. The gear-grinding, heart-wrenching, and constantly curving Going to the Sun Road. An engineering masterpiece in the 30s, it crosses Logan Pass. A road with more than sweeping vistas, it's an open text for the student of natural history. Glacier is a meeting place of climatic and vegetation zones. To the west, forests which resemble those of the Pacific Northwest. In the center, the high alpine tundra. And to the east, the prairie grasslands. They call it Glacier, but there are only a few, less than 50, true glaciers in the park. The end of the Ice Age 10,000 years ago marked the retreat of the great glaciers, but their impact on some of the oldest sedimentary rock in the world is highly visible. Across this diverse landscape, many species of wildlife occupy special niches. This is America's wilderness, 1 million wild acres. 700 miles of trails cross the deep valleys, skirt dark lakes, and border vibrant meadows. Every turn of the trail takes the traveler deeper into the wilderness. Even a day hike a few miles off a main road evokes a special sense of tranquility and peace. One of the best-loved parks in the United States is Yellowstone. On the high Yellowstone Plateau is the world's largest geothermal area. It includes half of the world's geysers. In the 19th century, Western trappers told stories of spouting columns of water 60 feet high and bubbling hot springs of iridescent green and gold. Jim Bridger called it a place where hell bubbled up. In the 1870s, expeditions verified these tall tales, and a movement began to protect these natural wonders. And in 1872, Yellowstone became America's first national park. Why is there such diversity of geothermal activity at Yellowstone? One reason, under this ancient caldera, the Earth's molten core, the magma, is very close to the surface, about 2 miles, instead of the usual 15 miles. Thermal activity results when water seeping down into the fractured volcanic crust of the plateau reaches these hot rocks. It boils. Under extreme pressure, the superheated water seeks a way out. We see it as steam vents, geysers, mud volcanoes, or bubbling hot springs. There are over 10,000 geothermal features in the park. But all of Yellowstone is not a bubbling cauldron. The Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone is one of the park's most impressive features. 2 great waterfalls add to the majesty of the canyon region. The upper falls sends the Yellowstone River into a short, narrow channel of a mile or so. And then the cold waters of the Yellowstone cascade over the lower falls in a thundering drop twice the height of Niagara. On the high plateau, man is a visitor. The land belongs to the wild animals. The largest member of the deer family, moose, favor marshy meadows. One of the more common animals is the elk, often seen in meadows along the roads. Yellowstone National Park is the greatest wildlife sanctuary in the United States outside of Alaska. Winter in Yellowstone is a hard season for wildlife. An icy cold grips the land in freezing embrace. Some animals move to lower elevations, others hibernate, but some must forage for meager fare hidden beneath the snow. The buffalo is well adapted to survive the harsh winters. Around the geothermal features, the ground is warm and bare, allowing limited foraging. A few adventurous snowmobilers and cross-country skiers brave the cold to enjoy a different Yellowstone, one of serene beauty, a winter wonderland. The Yellowstone landscape may seem stable, permanent, but nature is always evolving. In 1988, a series of major wildfires swept across the Yellowstone. The news media described it as a disaster, but few animals died. The burned areas are recovering. New habitats are opening. Yellowstone survived. Historically, fire has been a natural agent of change in Yellowstone. Perhaps the greatest danger from the fire came to buildings such as the Old Faithful Inn, one of the largest log buildings in the world. But the inn, like most buildings in the park, was saved by firefighters. Nearby, the symbol of this park, Old Faithful, lives up to its name with a spectacular show, which is reasonably faithful. The eruption is intermittent, between 30 to 90 minutes apart, but averaging every 75 minutes. Another impressive sight is Mammoth Hot Springs, where water trickles down row after row of delicately colored terraces of travertine. The terrace rims grow upward, eventually breaking, and the waters flow down and out to form new terraces. The colors in the pools come from algae. Yellowstone is more than scenic wonders. It's a monument to the far-sighted conservationists who preserved a primitive bit of America, then went on to develop a philosophy that spread to other parts of the world. As Yellowstone is broad and expansive, the Grand Teton National Park is compact. Totaling less than 40 miles in length, the Tetons are a dramatic mountain range. From the valley floor on the Jackson Hole side, the mountains rise abruptly 7,000 feet. This jagged outline of cirques, horns, and knife-edged ridges reach their highest point at the 13,770-foot summit of the Grand Teton. Their dramatic nature is enhanced by the lack of foothills. These ancient rocks, once a seabed, are very old, but in geologic terms, the mountain range is very young. It's very similar to the Sierra Nevada range in California. Both are fault block mountains with sloping west sides and steep east sides. Today's glaciers are remnants of the great glaciers of the ice ages. Now, the dominant force is water, but in the absence of the glacier, the visitor can observe how ice shaped the land. For what was once hidden under ice is now revealed. In 1807, John Coulter left the Lewis and Clark expedition to explore on his own and was probably the first white man to view the range. In 1929, the Grand Teton Park was established. Geology and wildlife are the strengths of this park. Wilderness travelers have the best opportunity to see wildlife. Driving through the park offers glimpses of moose and other species. This range is one of the premier mountaineering centers in the United States. The last two peaks in this range were not climbed until 1930. Climbing the Tetons is not for the novice, as many climbers consider them rivals of the Alps. No previous experience is required for a commercial trip down the Snake River, which meanders through the park, but it is not without danger. The Rockefeller Parkway presents classic views of the mountains and the Snake River that have become favorites with photographers from around the world. Each passing hour offers light changes, from somber to joyful. If any one park is a symbol of the great American outdoors, it must be the Rocky Mountain National Park. This high land, with 18 peaks over 13,000 feet, sits astride the Continental Divide. The most lofty is Long's Peak, whose summit rises to 14,255 feet. Below it are quiet lakes, bubbling streams, flower-laden meadows, and rocky canyons. The park is only 2 hours from Denver, and each year 3 million people visit the park. Only its ruggedness prevents it from being overrun with people. Much of its greatness can be viewed from Trail Ridge Road, which reaches an altitude of 12,183 feet and is above tree line for 11 miles, making it the highest through road in North America. It makes the alpine tundra accessible to all. The few small glaciers that remain in the park are reminders that glaciation formed this park. There are U-shaped valleys and great rock amphitheaters and moraines. Cool mountain lakes and streams provide a place for wildlife to drink and visitors to enjoy the beauty. In the southwestern corner of the country is a collection of captivating and intriguing parks. 3 of the national parks are in southern Utah: Zion National Park, a canyon oasis in the desert; Bryce Canyon National Park, a stunning assortment of standing geological giants; Arches National Park, with more than 600 arches. In Colorado, Mesa Verde National Park, home of the pre-Columbian dwellings of the vanished Anasazi. In the southeastern corner of New Mexico, Carlsbad Caverns National Park, and its dazzling display of stalactites and stalagmites. And the best known of these parks, Grand Canyon National Park in Arizona. Nothing prepares the visitor for a first encounter with the gaping chasm called the Grand Canyon. One of the 7 natural wonders of the world, the canyon statistics only begin to tell the story. Over a mile deep in places, between 1 mile and 14 miles in width, and 277 miles long. The Grand Canyon is nature's spectacular lesson in geology. Each year, millions stand in awe on the canyon rim. Most visit the South Rim with its scenic drive and panoramic viewpoints. Across the canyon, the North Rim is higher and less frequented, but equally startling. Far below the rim, the Colorado River cuts deep into the rock. Hikers find the Bright Angel Trail a challenge as it descends 9.5 trail miles to the river, an elevation change of 4,400 feet. For most hikers, the arduous trek requires 2 days for the round trip. Because of extremes of elevation, the rim can be cool, while in contrast, the inner canyon extremely hot. Mule rides into the canyon are popular with many visitors. Hiking or riding, the visitor can appreciate the variety of ecological zones in the canyon. It would take walking from Canada to Mexico to equal the diversity of climatic zones found in this magnificent canyon. Riding a mule on developed trails is very distant from the danger and excitement that faced John Wesley Powell, a one-armed Civil War veteran, when he led an expedition down the unexplored Colorado River in 4 boats in 1869. Perhaps the most comfortable way to travel deep in the canyon is to float down the Colorado. The quiet serenity of floating the calm stretches of the Colorado between the magnificent cliffs contrasts with the sheer adrenaline rush of hitting grade 10 whitewater. For over 5 million years, the river has cut deeply into the layers of ancient rock, the oldest dating back 1.7 billion years. These layers give a visual picture of nearly half of the Earth's geological history. With towering walls that reach toward the sky, Zion National Park is a canyon to remember. An outdoor cathedral without a roof, but with names that evoke a special reverence: the Great White Throne, Angel's Landing, and Court of the Patriarchs. If the rocks of the Grand Canyon represent the most ancient of rocks in the Grand Staircase, as the slice of history running through Grand Canyon, Zion, and Bryce Canyon National Parks is called, then the rocks of Zion are in the middle, steps representing about 35 million years of changing conditions that began 225 million years ago. Softly dripping, quietly running, and deeply cutting, water was, and still is, the creator of this landscape. For over 13 million years, the Virgin River has been cutting its way through rising land, revealing layer after layer of rock formations. Each side of the canyon, a mirror image of the other. Each layer, a story of Earth's formation and change. For a driving adventure, the Zion-Mount Carmel Highway, completed in 1930, traverses steep terrain and runs through a tunnel blasted parallel to the rock face. While you cannot stop driving through the tunnel, a few windows allow a quick look out. You can drive into the main canyon, but to fully sense its grandeur, you must walk. Perhaps up to the Weeping Wall, through the Narrows, where wading is a necessity. In places, the narrows of the Virgin River are only 20 feet wide and 1,200 feet deep. Or for the really adventurous, to the top of Angel's Landing for an eagle's view of the main canyon. Most visitors explore the well-known main canyon, but in the western part of the park is an equally intriguing area where erosion has formed the finger canyons of the Kolob. Deep in this canyon country is a great arch, depending upon measuring systems, the world's largest arch with a span that measures 310 feet. Kolob Arch, a magnificent symbol of this beautiful, varied, and diverse park. The pink cliffs of Bryce Canyon National Park are the uppermost and youngest layer of the 1.5 billion years of geological history represented in the Grand Staircase. These rocks were deposited between 50 to 70 million years ago. The park is not really a canyon, but a series of colorful amphitheaters along the edge of the Paunsaugunt Plateau. The area was named for an early Mormon settler, Ebenezer Bryce, who had a more practical observation of the area. He said the canyon was a hell of a place to lose a cow. The Paiute Indians described the area as red rocks standing like men in a bowl-shaped canyon. Minerals in the cliffs create the color. Lavenders and blues come from the manganese oxide, and reds and pinks from iron oxides. Water shapes this land. Repeated freezing and thawing carve out formations. Rain and runoff from hundreds of small streams cut into the ground. Over centuries of time, formations such as Thor's hammer, the hunter, and the natural bridge will disappear, and as time passes, unique new formations will arise to replace them. Home to the largest collection of arches in the world is Arches National Park. Arches of every size, shape, and dimension, over 600 have now been identified. Arches are not the only rock forms in the park. Hoodoos, pinnacles, buttes, windows, and sculpted monoliths were also formed by a unique combination of events and forces that occurred over a period of 300 million years. A thick layer of salt laid down in an ancient sea shifted as newer rock was deposited on top of the salt. Salt domes caused great cracks in the entrada layer of sandstone. Eventually, erosion exposed the sandstone, and the cracks became fins, then arches. You can see all stages of arch development in the park. At one time, these gaping holes were credited to the wind, but it's now known that they are the result of differential erosion. Water is the prime architect in carving this land. It's a slow process, but fins, arches, spires, and windows continue to be formed. From the road, many of the major formations are easily seen. In the courthouse towers section, lofty formations resemble downtown buildings. This relatively flat, open terrain encourages walking. The windows section includes turret arch, the north window, and smaller south window. Perhaps the most unusual arch is double arch, where two arches join together in a soaring cathedral-like buttress. Near the middle of Devil's Garden Trail is Landscape Arch, once considered the longest arch in the world. It's 306 feet across, a little longer than a football field. It's 89 feet high, almost as high as a 9-story building, yet it's only 6 feet thick at its narrowest. On a high, dry plateau, the trickling of water has carved out Carlsbad Caverns in the limestone. An early cowboy guano miner, Jim White, is credited with initially exploring them. He led early National Geographic expeditions that revealed the beauty of the caverns to the world. The first visitors descended in a guano bucket. Today, modern elevators carry visitors 750 feet down into the big room. These caverns are very large. The full size of them is yet to be determined, but so far, over 20 miles have been discovered. Only 3 of these miles are open to visitors. In Carlsbad, the big room could contain 14 football fields, and the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. could sit in one corner. The rooms are a constant 56 degrees and are unaffected by the outside temperature. The stalagmites growing from the floor up and the stalactites grown from the ceiling down were created after countless years by the slow drip after drip of water carrying dissolved calcium carbonate. The water evaporates, leaving the mineral deposits. One estimate indicates that it requires 750 years to add 1 inch. The chambers are most impressive when they're silent, with only the sound of dripping water. The stories told in the parks of the Southwest include not only the treasured record preserved in stone, but also the record of ancient men who lived here, such as those who inhabited Mesa Verde National Park. About 600 years after the birth of Christ, an Indian culture began at Mesa Verde, which means green table in Spanish. It flourished. First, they built pit homes, then more elaborate pueblos on the mesa tops. They grew corn, became potters. They're known as the Anasazi Indians. Eventually, they left the mesa tops to build elaborate cliff dwellings. Some stand 3 stories high and contain more than 50 rooms. Sacred kivas for religious and ritual ceremonies were built below the courtyards. More than 700 years after its abandonment, Cliff Palace remains an impressive monument to the skills of its builders and the flourishing culture they established. But there's a mystery here that scientists and archaeologists are still unraveling. Why did they leave these cliff homes? And where did they go? One theory suggests that the inhabitants depleted their environment, and a 23-year drought and subsequent bad harvests forced the Anasazi to move to Arizona and New Mexico at the end of the 13th century. Established in 1906 to preserve the archaeological finds, it's the only national park set aside for the works of man. Tucked away in the northwestern corner of the United States is a set of picturesque mountain parks. Southern Oregon hosts the deep blue waters of Crater Lake National Park. Central Washington's snow-capped Mount Ranier National Park. Along the Washington coast is the Olympic National Park, a multifaceted wilderness. With its many peaks which jut up from the forest to snow-capped summits, the North Cascades National Park in northern Washington has been called the American Alps. Mount Shuckskin is a towering glacial-clad peak near the Canadian border. Seen from the slopes of Mount Baker, it dominates the eastern horizon, hanging over the sea of mountains that is the North Cascades. This rugged topography is a result of massive glaciers that carved out a complex of peaks. They're not high, many are only 7,000 or 8,000 feet in elevation, but their steep-sided walls dropping into deep valleys give the impression of great height. The 300 glaciers in the park are sustained by the moisture-carrying clouds of the Pacific. As they cross the mountains, they drop tremendous amounts of snow during the winter months. The east side of the mountains lie in a rain shadow, and the land is much more open and dry. From lush forests and snow-capped peaks to sunny meadows and bare-rocked peaks, this is a park of contrasts. Some of the best views of the park come from the North Cascades Highway, which leads through the large recreation area administered by the Park Service. Ross Lake is part of that recreational area. On the lake, boaters and canoe paddlers travel deep into the heart of the wilderness. One of the features of this park is its inaccessibility. This is a wild land with few roads. For experienced backcountry travelers, it offers a scenic world of peaks, meadows, glaciers, and wildlife, as well as an occasional berry. A backpacking trip of a couple of days or a few weeks carries the traveler into a primitive area that's little changed by the hand of man, a place of solitude. The mammoth peak of Mount Ranier towers 14,411 feet over Mount Ranier National Park. For the residents of Seattle and other Puget Sound communities, it's simply the mountain, dominating their skyline on a clear day. It can be seen from over 100 miles away. An approach by air gives a feeling for the immense size of the mountain, which is quite young in geologic terms. During the last major glacial age, just 10,000 years ago, the movement of ice was far below the present park boundaries. No less than 25 named glaciers surround the summit, an expanse of ice covering 35 square miles. This silent land is punctuated by the creaking of ice as it slowly inches down the mountainside. During winter, the heavy precipitation at Paradise leaves a snowpack of 30 feet that renews the glaciers each year. The flowing rivers of ice carry rocks and debris that they deposit on the lower slopes. At Paradise, an entire season unfolds in its alpine meadows. The alpine meadows of Sunrise on the northeastern flank of the mountain offer tremendous views of Mount Rainier. The profusion of wildflowers attracts visitors who enjoy the antics of the marmots, one of the most visible of the animals in the park. In spite of the snow, the chill, and the cold, this is a volcano. Dormant now, only occasional wisps of steam from the vents on the summit remind us of its fiery past. Sitting atop the Cascade Range is one of the deepest and most beautiful lakes in the world, Crater Lake. It's not actually a crater, but a huge caldera which was created by the collapse of Mount Mazama. In geologic time, it happened very recently. Just under 7,000 years ago, the Indians of the area witnessed the creation of the lake. The events were included in their legends, and modern scientists have confirmed the stories that have entered their folklore. Over a period of 500,000 years, Mount Mazama grew through a series of massive eruptions to 12,000 feet. Then, in a climactic eruption that was 40 times greater than the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption, it scattered ash over 350,000 square miles. The emptied volcano could not support itself. It collapsed. In its place, an immense depression some 6 miles across and 4,000 feet deep. Slowly, water filled the caldera to its present depth of 1,932 feet. Part of the uniqueness of Crater Lake is its altitude. The surface of the lake is 6,176 feet above sea level. For a close-up look at the lake, the boat tour. For 2 hours, the boat circles the inside of the crater. It'll stop once at Wizard Island. The island is a cinder cone, which was formed during lingering volcanic activity after the collapse. This lake is very clean. With few impurities, sunlight can travel deep into the water. First, the reds, yellows, and other colors of the spectrum are absorbed, and then only the deepest blue is left to be scattered back to the surface. No picture or video does justice to the blue color of Crater Lake. An alpine wilderness, deep forested valleys, and a wild coastline. The Olympic National Park is really 3 parks in one. The Olympic Peninsula is an isolated part of the United States, with only very winding 2-lane roads connecting it to the rest of Washington. This isolation has served to preserve the environment, although the park is increasing in popularity. The Pacific Ocean dominates the environment, either through the waves crashing onto the beaches or the storms that it throws against the land. The 50 miles of coastline within the park are perhaps the wildest and least developed of the coastlands in the United States. Hikers travel the beach between the sea and the forest, climbing over steep headlands or skirting them at high tide. Winter storms leave driftwood skeletons of great trees that are used by backpackers as windbreaks. Shelter is important because cloudy skies and damp cold are normal for much of the year. When the Pacific storm clouds sweep up against the western slopes of the Olympic Mountains, it creates the wettest place in the continental United States. As much as 200 inches can fall in a single year. In the Hoh, Quinault, and other river valleys is one of the world's few temperate rainforests. The plants that live here are water-loving plants that seem to grow to gigantic proportions. The Olympics have the world's largest Douglas firs, western red cedar, and western hemlock. The light is soft, for the trees are thick and covered in air-loving moss and lichens. The fern forest areas have been compared to cathedrals. The area was originally set aside as an elk refuge, and the Roosevelt elk keep the undergrowth from completely clogging the forest. This is the largest unmanaged elk herd in the United States. The most accessible alpine area in the Olympic Park is Hurricane Ridge, where a road from Port Angeles ends at the visitor center. This wide-open panorama is enhanced by the Park Service naturalists that provide an explanation of the creation of these mountains. The monarch of this wet range, Mount Olympus, is slightly hidden by other snowy peaks. Along the 600 miles of hiking trails, visitors glimpse tranquil meadows, which are covered in wildflowers in the early summer, and breathtaking vistas. Our last 2 parks are found in California. Yosemite National Park, with its famous glacial valley in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and the world's tallest trees soaring into the coastal fog in Redwoods National Park. The forests reach right to the water's edge, but it's the groves of trees found inland which makes this area so special. These are old trees. Some began to grow more than 2,000 years ago. They thrive in the coastal fog belt. Some soar higher than the Statue of Liberty. They are the tallest trees on Earth. As they grow, the lower branches drop off, leaving the massive trunk unadorned until it reaches the canopy hundreds of feet above, forming a natural cathedral. Driving down Highway 101, the motorist travels through a quilt of national and state park lands. A number of excellent state parks protected outstanding groves before the national park was created in 1968. Occasionally, the most common big mammal in the park is seen, the Roosevelt elk. In 1978, the park, after much political controversy, was expanded to include an area in the south to protect the tallest trees in the world. No road accesses these trees, so visitors must take a Park Service shuttle, then walk almost 1.5 miles to the bend in Redwood Creek where the trees stand. Walking up to the base of the tallest tree gives some indication of its greatness. It towers over 367 feet. It has no known diseases, and insects cause no great damage. The thick bark provides protection even from fires. Acquiring land upstream from the tall trees was necessary because heavy logging was resulting in flooding and potential damage to the grove. The park has an ambitious program to restore the former logged lands to their natural state. Ambitious because the average tree lives to be over 700 years. The redwoods are more than trees of unsurpassed beauty. They're a living link with history. The uniqueness of Yosemite Valley is not the sole attraction of Yosemite National Park, which covers almost 1,200 square miles of the Sierra Nevada. Outside the valley are vast wild areas of high country wilderness, a land of lakes, small meadows, bubbling streams, and bare glacial carved peaks. The park doesn't close during the winter, although the number of visitors declines. Cross-country skiers and snowshoers can explore the back country. It's more difficult covering the 700 miles of trail within the park, but just as rewarding, for the views in winter can rival those of summer. It was the cold of the long winters during the ice ages which formed the canyon. The glaciers broadened the canyon of the Merced River to form the classical U-shaped valley and rounded the harder rocks to domes. El Capitan, its walls towering 3,600 feet, is said to be the largest block of granite on Earth. Climbers from around the world test their skills on the sheer rock walls. Down these glacial sculpted rocks thunder some of the world's most spectacular waterfalls. Upper Yosemite drops 1,430 feet to a ledge, and then an additional drop of 1,000 feet to the valley floor, making it the highest on the continent. The falls are fullest in the spring. The seeds of the conservation program, which resulted in the park system, were laid at Yosemite. Here, John Muir conducted much of his original research on the effect of glaciers on the landscape. As a result of his efforts, along with others, the area was deeded to the state of California in 1864. A national park surrounding the state park was established in 1890, and eventually in 1916, the two parks were merged. Poets, photographers, and artists have long been attracted to the valley, and they continue to explore its beauty. But for most people, visiting a national park is a chance to discover the ever-changing moods of nature. And at Yosemite, the valley is always changing its appearance, from hour to hour, day to day, and season to season. The foresight of the visionaries who promoted the development of parks is now shared by millions. A commitment to national parks is not an easy commitment. Yet few Americans would change the strict protectionism that has preserved these national treasures that stretch from border to border and coast to coast. Our national parks are truly America the Beautiful. They are wonders to behold and enjoy. America's greatest treasures are its national parks.